Who am I? I will tell you in 2 words who I am, what I do, and how I live.
Hello and welcome to a brand new player tips video hosted by yours truly, Dungeon Dad. Today we're going to be tackling one of the most common questions I'm asked both online and in real life by my players, and that is how to make your character interesting. This video is primarily focused towards players who might be excited to start their new campaign and create their next awesome character who's going to go on all kinds of fantastic adventures, looting and killing monsters on the way. However, this might also be useful to some of you DMs out there who might have players that are asking you similar questions. I recently had a player in one of my games come to me just basically saying that they weren't really happy with how their character was turning out. They kind of had this idea for what they wanted their character to be, but now that we were kind of playing, we were a few sessions into this new campaign, they weren't really clicking with what their character would want to do. They found that in certain situations, they wouldn't know how their character would react, and there was just kind of a disconnect. This is pretty natural at first too, especially to brand new players when you're kind of figuring out how the game works. But ultimately, there are a few things we can consider to try to remedy this problem. Whenever you're making a character, at the very beginning, there are these 4 things you want to consider. The first is, why did your character become an adventurer? The world of D&D is dangerous. There are real monsters out there that will straight up kill the average person. What is going on in your character's life or around your character that made them give up the farmer's life or made them run away from the orphanage where everything was so certain? You need to think of a reason as to why your character would want to leave the safety of their town or village or whatever it is. And maybe that's not a choice your character made. Maybe they were forced into that situation by who knows what. Perhaps their town was ransacked by orcs and they were sold into slavery. Or maybe they just simply wanted to escape the mediocre life of peasantry. It doesn't have to be something complex, but just have that reason in mind when you're moving forward and thinking about who your character is. The second thing you want to think about is what drives your character. What makes them tick? Are they in it for the treasure? Simply going into dungeons with capable companions looking to loot as much as they can? Or are they in it for glory? Maybe they're out to slay huge beasts and build renown around their name. Or maybe they have some kind of holy quest. This can be very common with the paladin class. Maybe there's some kind of evil overtaking the land and they feel it's their purpose to help destroy that evil as much as they can. Whatever it is, it's important to know at the core of your character what drives them forward. Thirdly, you have to decide how your character feels about the world around them. It's good to know what drives your character, but when that drive comes in contact with the world around them, how will they react? If they're simply out to loot and get as much gold and treasure as possible, obviously the monsters or nobles or whoever it is they're trying to get that from aren't going to just hand it over. How do they face that adversity? Think about the setting you're going to be in as well. Work with your DM here to try to figure out how your character fits into this world. If the world is a harsh and unrelenting one, such as the world of Dark Sun, does your character feed into that and meets cruelty with cruelty? Or is your character more soft at heart and they try to meet that cruelty of the world head on with compassion in hopes of changing hearts and minds around them? Speaking of the world, work with your DM to figure out where in the world your character comes from. If you like the idea of your character, say, being a noble, talk with your DM and say, where are there noble houses in your world? Which cities would a noble of my race most likely be from? If your DM sees that you're this invested in the world, it will make them want to share some information with you to kind of build on your character's backstory. Maybe they tell you your tiefling character might be from one of the noble tiefling houses in the city of Andrum. Then just talk with them about what those noble houses are like, and maybe that will kind of give you an idea of who your character is. Do they buy into the noble lifestyle and see themselves above the peasants and maybe try to collude with other nobles to raise their station? Or do they reject that noble house and try to forge their own path absent money and comfort? These are all things to consider when making your character, and they can really help kind of chisel out the edges of what your character is going to be. I find the one most helpful tool though when making a character is to ask the question, why? I feel like most of this can be broken down into this one tip. This can be especially helpful if, say, you come up with a fantastic idea for a character, but you're not really sure how it fits in with the world. For example, maybe your character is a treasure hunter who seeks relics and ancient, lost, mysterious things that can be found within the dungeon, but you're not really sure how that fits in with your backstory. So why? Why does your character seek those things? Maybe their parents run an antique shop back home, so they're seeking rare treasures to send back to the antique shop at home that their parents or family, whoever it is, might benefit from the sale of these things. Or maybe one of your character's parents was a treasure hunter in their life, and they've kind of passed on these myths and legends of ancient lost treasures that have now come to you. So seeking to try to find the things that your parents couldn't find, you go out in search of treasure. Maybe your father, who owns the antique shop, was once a famous treasure hunter in his day, although there was that one thing that he never managed to find. He's collected many notes and gathered old tomes leading to where it might be located, but was never able to track down the location before the years caught up with him. And that's pretty good, but maybe you say, why? Why wasn't he able to find that treasure? Well, perhaps there's some powerful creature who didn't want it to be found. And now this is where you're getting into the territory where you're giving your DM things that they can feed off of. At this point, I would just leave it to your DM and say, this is my idea for a character, and maybe they can kind of build around that in their world, and your character will discover things about themselves as they travel through their adventures. Another big piece of advice I have for you too is tropes are fantastic. I know whenever we're making a new character, and trust me, I'm guilty of this as well, we want to make something original that no one has conceived of before with a crazy backstory that's very interesting. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, it's a lot of fun to try to write something new and original that no one's going to see coming. However, there is something to be said for creating a character that falls into a certain archetype or a certain trope. For example, our treasure hunter character here, you might model them after Indiana Jones. There's nothing wrong with that. Just use that as your baseline for who your character is. Until you really get comfortable with your character and start to develop your own personalities and quirks, maybe just model them after Indiana Jones. Anytime you're in a situation, think back on those Indiana Jones movies you watched and try to decide what would that character do in this situation. You don't necessarily have to follow beat for beat what you think Indiana Jones would do, but it creates a good starting point for you to build off of. When other characters meet your character for the first time, they don't know about all your backstory or the super awesome history you've built up with the DM. At face value, they just see the interaction you're having with them right now. A good example of this is in my personal game just last week. One of the characters is in fact a Tiefling Noble. She considers herself worthy of station and is a true, very stereotypical noble, at least for the time being. It was the Summer Solstice Festival and they were in this town and they were looking for rooms in the inn. Of course, because the festival was going on, it was extremely busy and there were only 2 rooms left and there were 6 of them. The innkeeper explains that rooms are of short supply, so they're 5 silver for the night. Immediately, before anyone else has a chance to speak, this player who's playing the noble character explains that her character walks up to the counter, hands 5 gold pieces to the innkeeper and says, "I'll take a room to myself. Thanks," and then goes upstairs and retires to bed. I thought this was such a good character moment for them because immediately you understand what their character is all about. In a way that is ultimately harmless to the party, she has basically shown that she feels she's above these dirty adventurers and is only with them out of circumstance at the moment. Time will tell whether this character will change and become more sympathetic to the common man's plight, but just based on that interaction, you just have a great picture of who this character is. Because that's the thing, your characters are spending months together, right? When you travel from town A to town B, it might be a 3 weeks journey in between, but the only time you're actually interacting with one another is when a random encounter is turned up on the dice and you have to fight something or maybe talk to someone on the road or something like that. Your characters aren't necessarily going to be silent that entire time. The implied idea is that during those 3 weeks, they talk with each other and are having conversations and getting to know one another. Whereas in reality, you, the players, may only have 1 or 2 conversations as a result of that entire traveling scenario. So because of this, the few times you do get to RP your character and interact with the other characters, you really want to just ham up your character traits. If you're playing the role of the haughty noble, make sure you emphasize that every time you have a chance. If you're playing the role of the timid, lowly character, make sure you emphasize that you're scared to fight and you don't want to deal with confrontation anytime you get the opportunity to. It's not to say that your character is necessarily behaving this way all the time, but it really just sets this dramatic feel to who your character is based on the limited interactions that we, the players, get to witness. Another suggestion I would have for making a new character is adding in some flaws. Now, I know based on the background you pick, there's a flaw table that you can roll on or pick one you like, and honestly, I think those are great, and there's some pretty great ones in there. But as the game continues, your character is not stagnant. pick up flaws based on your experiences. Maybe you're playing a noble paladin who's been knocked unconscious or bloodied in 3 separate battles against orcs. Maybe even one of the other players was killed by orcs. This character, who might have had nothing to say about orcs before, could develop some resentment towards orcs. So maybe months down the line, even though that stuff happened a long time ago, whenever you meet an orc NPC, you just immediately are distrustful of them. Also, when it comes to originally making your character, just because there's only a spot for one flaw on the character sheet when you're building your character based on their background, that doesn't mean you have to just have one flaw. I recently watched an interview with Taliesin Jaffe on the Dungeon Life YouTube channel, actually, where he made a really great point about making characters. I'll post a link to it below if you want to check it out, but basically what he talks about is that losers make excellent characters, and I couldn't agree more. One of the most fun characters to play is that of the underdog, the outcast, the character that no one really expects anything from, but when your time to shine comes up, you can surprise everyone. Or maybe you don't surprise everyone. Maybe you just are a thieving rogue and will always be a thieving rogue. But that's the thing about underdog characters, is it can allow for some interesting depth. Some of the best heroes we see on TV and in movies are losers. Because at the end of the day, everyone does love the underdog story, and it can make for some really entertaining moments. I would also suggest trying to come up with a goal. And this can range from having a specific item that your character is after that they just need to find. Or maybe it's a person who they've lost, like a sibling. Or perhaps a specific person who is a target of vengeance that they want to kill. Or it can be something less specific. Ultimately, whatever your goal is, it's going to feed into your character and your personality. Maybe if you are on the path to vengeance and there's someone you're hunting down, every time the party is in a town, you kind of on the sly just ask around and see if you can find out more information about your target. This can be something that the party might not even know about at first, but as the adventure progresses and your characters get to know each other better, it might come to light. It just gives you one more thing to kind of play off of. And the other players, hence their characters, will kind of know what to expect from you after a certain amount of time. But that doesn't mean you have to stay consistent. Now let me rephrase that for a moment here. I would suggest staying consistent in the sense of who your character is. If you've established your character feels a certain way about a certain thing, try to stick to that. But don't be afraid to change sometimes. The whole point of role-playing is as your character experiences more and more things, they do start to change a little bit. Life on the road and the life of an adventurer will change someone, whether for the better or the worse. If, say, your goal, whatever it happens to be, continues to elude you, how does that change your character? Does your character just become more and more determined? Do they get frustrated and start to lose hope? Whatever it is, building on that slowly is something that makes D&D so interesting to me. Because a lot of us, when we first start playing the game, have this idea in our mind that we're going to make this character and that's kind of it. But you don't ever stop building your character or writing your character. As the game progresses, talk with your DM about things you kind of think your character might be going through or ideas you have of how your character is developing. You are just as much a part of the story as the DM. In fact, your characters are what makes the story that much more interesting. And if you only take one thing away from this video, I would have it be this: just work with your DM. He or she wants your character to be cool and interesting, and they want to just let you tell the story of your character with the rest of the party. One trap we do fall into sometimes is getting too focused on our characters, however, so try to remember everyone else is playing their character as well, and let other people have the opportunity to be cool sometimes. But at the end of the day, as long as everyone tries to keep this kind of idea that we have in consideration, everyone will get their chance to shine, and everyone will get a chance to build up their characters. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have any other questions about making a character or just role-playing in general, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I would love to talk about it. And if you like what I do here and you want to support the channel, please subscribe. I have at least one new video every week. And of course, I'd welcome you to join our new Discord server where we can chat more personally as well as with other members of the community. If you do want to show some extra support towards the channel and you're able to, I do have a Patreon page, so I'd encourage you to check that out. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.